Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast. Hello and welcome on board flight episode 37 of Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast. This is your captain and host speaking, Geoff Willis, and each week I'll be taking flight to talk fantasy Premier League football. You can find the show on a whole host of podcast services. Just search Captain's Pick. Please leave a review, like, share and subscribe. On today's show, I'll give my quick thoughts on next season's league fixtures and my initial thoughts on the player prices for next season, and I'll finish off with my plans for the podcast. So, just going to have a quick look at game week 1 of the 2019-20 FPL season fixtures, and then a brief look at some of the teams with a good start in terms of fixtures for the season. So in game week 1, Liverpool host Norwich at Anfield, the Friday night game. Perfect start for Liverpool, playing a promoted team who didn't have the best defence in the Championship, so looking for a quick start and plenty of goals potentially in that game for Liverpool. And on the Saturday we have West Ham hosting Man City in the early game. Don't think this will be too tricky for Man City. It depends if the West Ham crowd can get up for that match. It's an early game, so crowd don't tend to be too up for the early games, although that is the first game of the season. We'd still expect Man City to win that, but don't think that'll be the plethora of goals that the Liverpool match will be. But I anticipate City to win there, and West Ham potentially get on the score sheet, but would have thought 3 points for City there. Bournemouth at home to Sheffield United, so again one of the newly promoted teams. Bournemouth so good going forward last season. I expect goals in that match, certainly from Bournemouth. They've not been great at the back, so could see that being goals going in either end there, but probably a win. Could be a few goals for Bournemouth. Burnley at home to Southampton. Bit of a hard one to call this. Both teams will be looking to get into that mid-table kind of clutch of teams by the end of the season. I think Burnley will probably do better this season, though Europa League. Southampton, under their new manager from last season, definitely improved towards the end of the season. So, tough game to call. That could be a draw there. Neither team too great at going forward, although if Barnes and Woods get off to a good early start for Burnley at home, could be a goal in there for Burnley. So Burnley might just nick that, but could be a draw, could be a couple of clean sheets in that one. Palace at home to Everton. Everton finished really strong last season. Not sure what their away form will be, but it was again just as good as their home form in the last sort of 10 games of the season. Plenty of clean sheets and a few goals there. Palace, a bit hard to know. Wan-Bissaka's gone to Man United now, so will they manage to get a new right back in time for the start of the season? Tricky one to call. They weren't great at home last season, and Zaha, there's talk of him going to Arsenal, so if that does happen, I think Everton could be in line for an away win. A tight one though. Everton just. Watford at home to Brighton. Brighton, new manager now, apparently going to be a bit more attacking, so that'll be interesting. Watford, a very decent season last time out. Again, hard one to call there. Either team will nick that, I think, but could be a draw. I think they'll definitely be a clean sheet in there in that match for one of the sides. And then the late game on the Saturday, Spurs at home to Villa, playing one of the newly promoted teams again. Expect Spurs to get off to a good start here at home in their new ground for the first Premier League game of next season, starting proper, so to speak. And Villa, bit of an unknown quantity, I would say, at this stage. But Harry Kane with a whole summer off, or pretty much most of the summer off, could be sparks flying in that game. And then the Sunday games, we've got Leicester at home to Wolves. Interesting to see how Wolves perform. They'll be in the Europa League. They would have probably played a couple of qualifying games already before the season starts, the Premier League season. So they may be in some better form, but they are the away team. Leicester under Rodgers definitely improved in the second half of last season. Very tough to call that one. I could see all results there, draw or a win for either side. So very, very interesting game, that one. Newcastle at home to Arsenal. Rafa Benitez has now left Newcastle. No new owners as yet. No manager. Who knows with them? Though it is Arsenal, not great away from home, especially going up to the northeast. Very difficult to even analyse this one until we know further information from Newcastle's perspective. But if it goes the way it is, I could probably see Arsenal winning there, even though they're not great away from home, especially at Newcastle or in the northeast. And then the last game, Man United at home to my team, Chelsea. The last game on the Sunday. Two complete unknown quantities at this moment. Man United just signed Wan-Bissaka, so it's a good first signing for them. But they probably need another 2, maybe 3 defenders to sign for them to shore things up at the back. Not very good at the back at all last season. Chelsea had a decent season, but Sarri's now left. There's talk that Lampard could well be the new manager, but we do have a transfer embargo. So there could well be a lot of players coming back on from loan. Still not sure really who our starting forward's going to be. And of course Hazard left in the summer for Real Madrid, so no world-class players for us anymore. So very difficult to predict that one. I'd probably be staying away from both of these teams unless some of the new loan players that come back for Chelsea are priced very cheap. They could get a shot under Lampard if he is the manager. So that's the opening game week 1 fixtures. And then just a little brief look at some of the teams that have got a good start. And I think we have to start really at the champions, Man City, who have, a great start, really. In the first 11 games, they face just one top 6 side, with Tottenham game, second game, games against Bournemouth, West Ham, Brighton, Norwich, Watford, Wolves, Crystal Palace, Aston Villa, Southampton. Expect them to get off to a pretty decent start. I'll certainly be looking at definitely two players from them in my squad, and price depending, obviously. If we can squeeze in a third, that would definitely be what I'd be looking at. Next up, Liverpool again. Great set of fixtures, certainly in the first 8 games they face 2 top 6 sides. But if you are listing the other teams, Norwich at home, Southampton away, Burnley away, Newcastle at home, Sheffield United away, Leicester at home. So again, great start for them. Expect them to fly out the traps for sure. Whether players like Salah and Mane have been the African Cup of Nations, whether they're tired or not, I'm not sure, but they'll probably carry the momentum on from the Champions League final, I'd expect. So I expect both City and Liverpool to start off well. The team that probably has the next best set of fixtures is probably Everton. They only play 2 top 6 sides in the first 14 matches. So games: Crystal Palace, Watford, Villa, Wolves, Bournemouth, Sheffield United, Burnley, West Ham, Brighton, Southampton, Norwich, Leicester. So an amazing start for them. Had a great end to the season last season, so I'll certainly be looking at players from Everton. Certainly be looking at Luca Dean, who performed so well for me last season. Clean sheets, attacking points, bonus points. You got to look towards Sigurdsson as well, who had his best season I think so far in the FPL, and potentially Pickford in goal, good at saving penalties. There could well be more penalties as VAR is introduced next season, and then probably the next team with the next best fixtures, Bournemouth, who play two top 6 sides in the first 10 games, and the first 2 games they start off with Sheffield United at home and then Aston Villa away. So 2 newly promoted teams in the first 2 games, and then other games: Leicester, Everton, Southampton, West Ham, Norwich, Watford, in that first 10 games. So very good at going forward. So the likes of Wilson, King, Brooks, Fraser. Definitely be looking at those as possible signings in my squad. Not great defensively last season at all, but with those opening fixtures, if there's a Bournemouth defender that comes in cheap enough, possibility of that maybe, but just only for those first sort of 8-9 games, and then probably using a wild card to ship them out for the rest of the season. And then just wanted to look at Spurs' opening fixtures, and although they do have Man City away in the second game and Arsenal away in the fourth game, if you look at their home fixtures, they're very tasty in the first 9 games. So they've got Villa at home, Newcastle at home, Crystal Palace at home, Southampton at home, Watford at home, and they've also got away games at Leicester and Brighton in that first 9 fixtures. So definitely be looking at Harry Kane. Probably not too many other options there. Potentially defensively, maybe. But hopefully a refreshed Kane. I think he broke the August hoodoo last season, to be honest. And with the most of the summer off, coming back from that injury, if he hits form, starts off well in that opening Villa game, could be one of another big season for him. So that was the sort of the opening fixtures, and then some of the teams which I think have got good fixtures to begin with. And then just my brief thoughts. I want to go into this more on the next pod. But the game is now up and running for next season, and some of the players have come in. I think very reasonably priced. So Robertson coming in at 7 million, same as Alexander-Arnold. So much value from those 2 players, the Liverpool defenders. Van Dijk, 500,000 cheaper, 6.5. So it's, if you can't get to the 7, then he could be very good value. Lots of clean sheets. And assist points coming from the other 2. A few goals maybe from Van Dijk. Salah's come in 500,000 cheaper. So 12.5 million. Looks like possibly a dead cert for him. Mane is only 1 million cheaper. So yes, if you're really struggling price-wise, you could then go Mane instead of Salah. But I think Mane was excellent at home, not so great away. Salah can bring the points home and away, so potentially Salah there. Not sure you'd be able to afford the both of them, with the likes of Sterling going up to 12 million, but again, excellent really last few seasons and a fair price for him. Harry Kane getting a 1.5 million reduction in price, so 11 million. He's it's probably got to be a dead cert for me. Depends on your formation and the other players you want to fit in, of course. But if you're going to have a premium striker, it's him or Aguero. Aguero at 12 million. Kane a million cheaper. The likes of Sterling, KDB kept at 9.5. Whether the value's there with Aguero as well, I'm not sure. Some other players, interesting to see. Wilson comes in at 8 million for Bournemouth. That's a big price rise for him. I wonder if he's too expensive now, especially as Josh King has kept the same value, 6.5, so it's £1.5 million cheaper. He's on pens as well. Interesting choices there. Fraser's gone up to 7.5 million. Again, is that too expensive? Oof, 0.5 maybe, but still very decent value if he brings in the same amount of points. But yeah, it's hard. They've got a great start at Bournemouth, but it's hard picking the right one out of those ones. So Brooks at 6.5 as well. It's come in too much for me for Brooks. I was hoping he'd be 5.5 potentially, but I think King may hold the best value there. Looking at some of the other prices, Laporte's price rise up to 6.5 million. I think that's fair. Very decent season for him. Man City, Liverpool keepers at 6 million both. Yeah, that's it's to expected. Pickford's gone up to 5.5. In general, looking at the pricing, mostly fair, but there's quite a lot of the goalkeepers gone up from 4.5 to 5 million. So potentially making a 4.5 million goalkeeper rotation a lot more difficult this season. So I wonder if premium is the way to go. But there's Dean came in, price rise up to 6 million. Still think that's really good value for him, especially with his opening fixtures. Sigurdsson's got price rise up to 8 million. Pretty decent value, but if you're going to have the likes of Salah and Sterling and Kane or Aguero, whether you can fit in Sigurdsson and the likes of Fraser as well, I'm not so sure. Mane I already talked about, 11.5 million. It's a player you bring in, you've got to be able to captain, but I think you only want to captain them at home. Where Salah, you could pre-captain Salah home or away. Likewise with Sterling, and likewise with Kane. Aguero, not great away. So, and then the Wolves players, Doherty's come in at 6 million, which is insane. I think that's just way too much now with not great opening fixtures, Europa League to contend with. Didn't get the amount of clean sheets that you expected last season, or they'd expected. Got obviously good goals and assists from him, but that is a lot of money. Wan-Bissaka, prices up to 5.5. At 4 million last season, he was a gem, absolute gem. Loads of bonus points, clean sheets. Depends on what Man United do, but I think it's too expensive. And we still don't know how well attacking wise he'll be in that team. And again, they need to sign some other defenders. So if they don't bring clean sheets, there's no value with him, I don't think. And then the last one, Jimenez, good price rise, I would say, definitely a fair one, up to 7.5 million. Slight difficult price range, depending on again what your formation is. Not great fixtures to begin with, Europa League. Tricky one really. Jota has been classified as a forward now, and he's 6.5 million, so a million cheaper. Maybe the value, if you determined to get a Wolves forward, might lie with Jota. Rashford up to 8.5 million. Same as Lukaku. Very interesting, but who knows with Man United. Rogue pick of Sanchez, Alexis Sanchez down to 7 million. But again, absolute unknown quantity there. So there's definitely a lot of interesting pricing going on, I'd say. Lots of value to be found, I would say. But there is some players that I think have been outpriced of the game. But that is FPL for you. So that was my sort of initial thoughts on player pricing. A lot more will be going into that, of course, going into next season. And then really that brings me on to what my plans are for the podcast. So this is the penultimate episode of this first series or season of the FPL Captain's Pick podcast. And next episode, the last episode in this season, and will be a bit of an experiment, a bit of a test. So the plans for the podcast is that I'll be hopefully live streaming the podcast, barring any technical difficulties, and I've had a fair share of those this season, certainly in the second half of the season. But plan is to live stream. My background is a little bit more in production, so working with cameras, and so the hope is to live stream the podcast, and the podcast will still go out as an audio feed, but there'll be a video live feed, and then that will also be put up on YouTube. My initial thoughts is I'll be live streaming from Twitch, and then the replay of that video will then be uploaded to YouTube, and the audio will be put out as usual as a podcast. So episode 38, the last episode, will be the first time I'm going to attempt to do the live streaming. We'll see how it pans out. It definitely be testing the waters. All the information on that I'll put up on the Twitter account at Captain's Pick Pod. But it will definitely be a bit of a test, and we'll see how we go. And then in that pod, I'll be again looking a bit more into player pricing, fixtures, and maybe some initial drafts, because the game has launched for next season. Again, fingers crossed, barring no technical difficulties. And then from then onwards, the second series of the podcast, going into the 1920 season, we'll be doing some live streams over the summer, mostly going through draft teams, transfers, all that FPL good stuff, and that's the hope really for the podcast. But more details to follow on that, of course. Okay, so that's where I'm going to land the show. Feel free to send in any questions or topics you'd like discussed on the show to the podcast Twitter account at Captain's Pick Pod, or the podcast email address captainspickpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening to this in-flight podcast. I've been your captain, and until next time, it's been my pleasure to talk with you. Captain's Pick, the FPL podcast.